Hello, folks. Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. It's Thursday, October 26th, 2017. And today, I want to talk about what I see as sort of some new movement in the leading edge of society to try to integrate voices that have not been integrated so far. And I'll sort of back up a little bit. And, one of the themes of what I talk about a lot here on the Daily Evolver is that one of the great engines of evolution is defeat. Just seeing that the way you thought things were or the way one should act just doesn't work. And a year ago, I was talking about how wonderful it was going to be because I think a year ago, a couple of weeks before the election, Hillary was, 8 or 10 points ahead in the polls. And, we were going to see a resounding defeat of Trump and Trumpism. And they were going to get the opportunity, as defeated people have throughout history, to say what went wrong, and do some introspection and find out what they've been missing and bring it in and move forward. But it turns out that we liberals are the ones who are having to do that. And I will say that I'm happy to see that we are. And I think Integral has a special way of doing that is more complete. But we see it happening in the mainstream, in sort of an exit postmodernism too. And today I want to go through 4 examples of what I'm seeing in just current culture. One is a skit from Sarah Silverman. Another is a column from the Daily Cause. Another is a little video on feminism from Vox.com, which is Ezra Klein's site. And the 4th is a column by David Brooks. So let me just get going on this. The first one is a show by Sarah Silverman that she just launched on Hulu called I Love You, America. So automatically you can begin to see that what she's trying to do and what a lot of people are feeling is, how can we sort of go back to our traditional strata and bring forth a patriotism that can have some resonance with the nationalists that we see that, or that in the nationalist impulse that brought Trump to power. And so this is what she's trying to do here. So this is her show, I Love You, America. And I'll play about a minute and a half where she goes and talks to Trump voters. So here we are. So let me see, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to share screen. I'm going to go to, hang on. I'm going to start over. I'm going to go to share screen. I'm going to turn that off. Hang on. Here we go. Yep. All right. So do that. Go over here, do this. This is the first time we're doing this, but it's pretty fun. And I think I'm going to learn it real quick.
One of my goals on this show is to find something in common with people outside my little bubble. And this week, I'm headed to a random city in America to do just that. Now, I want to be spontaneous, so to decide where to go, I'm going to throw this dart at a map and see where fate takes me. Totally random city in America. Here we go. Texas. I'm in Mineola, Texas, the mini areola of Texas, where 87% of the people voted for Trump. I'm here to meet the locals and see if we can find some common ground and undivide ourselves. Thank you for having me. You guys are firemen. Do you guys all own guns?
Yes.
Yes.
You're not feeling like a stand your groundiness with me right now, are you?
No, not by any means.
Obvious question. Who did you vote for and why?
I voted for Trump. Why? I just knew that it was somebody different than what we've had before.
And you voted for Trump, right?
Trump,
What did you like about him?
Obviously, he's done well business-wise.
Gay marriage. Who's for it? Interesting, interesting. You guys not for it. Go on.
Not something I really care one way or another. That's what happens.
Then you are for it.
I'm not for or against it. Doesn't matter to me.
How about you, Dal?
Not for it or against it. Haven't got a horse in that race, so to speak.
Would you speak out for somebody's right to get married if they're gay?
I don't know that I'd speak out, as I've sat here quietly through most of this.
It doesn't affect your own sexuality
No, it does not.
in any way.
No, not anymore.
So who gives a fuck?
The people that are doing whatever they're doing, they have to answer to their higher power, whatever they think that may be.
If Jesus came back,
Yeah.
because he's coming back, do you think you would believe him that he was Jesus?
If you believe in it, you'll know.
You think you'll know?
I will know.
I'm Jesus.
No, you're not.
All right. So, you know, I think a nice try in a way, but, you know, they actually do give a fuck. And I thought the most interesting part of that piece was when he said, "I'll know when Jesus comes back." And that was the most authentic moment in the whole thing, because aside from that hairdresser, God bless her, these people are pretty nervous. And you see that, you know, when she goes on, she talks about climate change and they don't believe in it. And then she tells them about the 95% of the scientists who do and so forth. And it's not so much really about listening to them, honestly. And in terms of the gay marriage thing, what you're seeing here and what you just witnessed was, you know, a certain progress. The people who are against it, and you can bet that they are a little less equivocal when they're on their own and not on television. And even the people who are for it, there's a half-raised hand. You see that, you know, that is defeated. In that way, culture has moved forward. And this is where challenging a point of view, not just empathizing with it. And that's, you know, there's a polarity in relationship in general, where we cooperate and we compete, where we challenge each other and where we empathize and love each other. And, you know, both of them have to be in play here as we deal with our political opposition. Now, for most people at postmodernity, it's all about challenge and demonizing and vilifying, just as it is from traditionalists towards postmodernists. But at Integral, we want to bring that love piece in. I think she tried. At the end, she does this segment where she says, okay, let's stop talking about red states and blue states and start talking about brown states. And then she has them all share about a time when they, as she put it, shit their pants. And I found it quite cringeworthy. It's on there. You can see it. It's on Hulu. Everybody was a good sport. And they seemed to, but it was pretty cringeworthy. But so I got to say, when I heard Sarah Silverman was doing I Love You, America, I was pretty excited because I find her to have an integral sensibility a lot of the time. And she was on the HBO show Crashing, which is a half-hour comedy about a comedian who's crashing. And she plays one of his friends. And the advice she gives him is so beautiful and so, in my opinion, integral. I'll actually find it and play that for you to sort of show the sort of integral side, to rehabilitate her, because I don't think this show, I hope she finds her feet, but I don't think that really did it. Okay, next is a column from the Daily Cause, written by one of their columnists, Bob Burnett. And he went to a group in Berkeley, where he lives, in a 2-hour discussion on reaching out to Trump voters. And it was his group is called Indivisible, which was founded on two primary values, as he writes. One is inclusivity and the other is nonviolence. And so they, as he put it, many progressives after November 8th were dismayed to learn that one or more of their members of their family had voted for Donald Trump. It wasn't some random Republican in a remote red state. It was someone they had shared holidays and vacations with. It was a beloved member of the family. So he's talking about this meeting where they met with two UC professors, one Arlie Hochschild, and the other is George Lakoff. And George Lakoff is very highly regarded by many people in the integral community. And I actually don't know a lot about him, but I was interested because, you know, he is respected in the integral community, to see, you know, what went on here at this big 2-hour meeting in Berkeley. I just want to read one more sentence before I get into the meat of it. And this is, again, Bob Burnett, and he's writing, he said, reaching out to a Trump voter is a reflection of inclusivity. That's good. Including everyone in the conversation. Every voter, regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, sexual preference, or how they voted on November 8th. And that's, I think, great movement forward, because generally Green has the idea, the postmodern worldview, that everybody's included, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual preference, etc., as long as they agree with me. And so to include people who voted for Trump on November 8th is really broadening that definition. So Bob Burnett came up with what he considered to be the 7 key points that Hochschild and George Lakoff made. So this is secondhand from Lakoff, and I'll comment on some of it. So the first point that he came up with of these 7 points was to listen. He said, Trump voters expect liberals to disrespect them. Therefore, no matter how outrageous Uncle Al's statement may be, listen and perhaps comment, I'm interested that you think that. And I don't know about you, but I'm interested that you think that is something that you show, don't tell, to use the expression, the artistic expression. If you're really interested, you don't just say, I'm interested, you follow up with questions. You respond back in a way that lets them know you understood. This is basically couples therapy. When you have a couple at odds, the standard practice is to have one person state their point of view and make the other one restate that point of view to the first person's satisfaction so that they know you understood. And this is just one of these magical principles of communication, that if you let another person know that you really heard what they have to say, then you can answer back anything you want and they'll hear you. They'll more likely hear you. People can't resist other people being curious about them. So I'm interested that you think that has just a little hand in it, a little back off hand in it. I guess it depends on how you say it. Okay, number 2. Do not insult Trump. Hochschild and Lakoff's writings make it clear that Trump voters identify with Trump. I think that's true. To them, he's successful, politically incorrect, and a guy who has beaten the system. When they say something positive about Trump, reply, I hear what you say, but I'm worried about corruption and safety. Corruption because Trump will not reveal his tax returns, and safety because of his ties to Russia. What do you think? So this is the instruction of what you say when they talk about positively about Trump. Again, listen. I mean, you don't come back with your, talking about of it. And 2, when Trump voters are concerned about corruption, the corruption they're concerned about is the corruption of the culture, of their culture that their parents and grandparents lived in, and your mass media, you liberals, and your out of control immigration, and your porn, and your sexualization, and your video games are corrupting the culture. So maybe listen about that with their corruption, and safety. So again, I think that misses the mark. Next, clarify your own values. Trump voters have different values from liberals. Before you talk to Uncle Al, be clear about your own values. For example, do you believe that we are, quote, our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper, unquote? Search for common ground. For example, does the Trump voter believe in, quote, the golden rule? How does that apply to people of color? George Lakoff suggests we ask Uncle Al, what actions are you most proud of? All right, so I like this one. I think that last statement from Lakoff is to ask Uncle Al, what actions are you most proud of? And then really listen and really absorb. That is a gift of generosity to Uncle Al. And you are going to have you're going to have a better relationship with Uncle Al after that. So I'll give him points for that one. 4, recognize worldview. Oh, goody. Trump voters see the world as an elaborate hierarchy with rich American, white, straight Christian guys at the top. Nonetheless, most Americans cherish the myth of the, quote, little guy who started out with nothing and fought his way to the top. Search for common ground in the concept of fairness. Everyone deserves a chance. When I first read that they were talking about how Trump voters see the world as a hierarchy with rich American, white, straight Christian guys at the top, I was going to say, you know, there you go, vilifying, demonizing, but actually it's true. They do think that. And they, if you dig a little deeper, especially among the ones who really think about it, what they think is that white Christian culture is the culture that has brought modernity and, you know, all of the fruits of modernity to the world. You know, that Judeo-Christian thing was what informed Europe, and of course the horrors of the Middle Ages and all of that. But, you know, Europe was the first to, you know, bring in modernity, both in terms of the philosophy and in terms of the Industrial Revolution, technology, science, and all that sort of thing. And, you know, it has nothing to do with race. And there's a whole show in how different races have brought different stages of development into the world. But it is, if we look through a lot of what we see as racism as postmodernists, what we see is that these are people who are actually happy to have a Ben Carson. You know, they're actually happy to have people of different races and creeds and colors and all of that stuff, as long as they agree with them. You know, who knew? This is mono-perspectivalism at work. So, you know, I think we can understand that a little more deeply, but it's true what they're saying here about how they see the world. All right, next, be careful about climate change. Most Trump voters do not believe in global climate change. Rather than take on this issue in general, talk about a specific local issue, such as contaminated drinking water. Say, I believe we should protect our children from contaminated water. Don't you agree? Really? Of course they agree with that. And this is another misunderstanding of postmodernity in terms of understanding traditionalists and modernists even. Climate change, as understood by the leading edge, is a world-centric problem. It's humanity bumping up against the limits of the last finite system, which is the planet. What modernity has done every step of the way in various communities and countries is they've cleaned up the water. I mean, yes, there's the Flint, Michigan, and there's other cases. But by and large, when you look at where America was, even when I moved to Denver back in the late 70s, we had a brown cloud that we were famous for. When I grew up in Youngstown in Pittsburgh, the rivers, you'd never let your kids get near those rivers, or the Great Lakes. They're all cleaned up. Modernity cleans up its own backyard. You can see that happening in China. And it doesn't necessarily come from a world-centric view. Only the world-centric view makes that problem global. Locally, people handle it. So there's a distinction there. Next, be careful about race, ethnicity, and national origin. Many Trump voters live in segregated communities and do not know immigrants or have social contacts with people of color. Search for common ground by referring to the golden rule. What would Jesus do, ask them, if he saw a black man being beaten by the police? Well, this is such a litmus test. I mean, it's just so interesting. What a traditionalist would probably think if they saw a black man being beaten by the police is, thank God the police are protecting us. And they might be right. Maybe the policeman is subduing a criminal. That's the way the right would see that, just reflexively. The left would see police brutality and racism. And the bigger truth is there are plenty of both. And it's a Rorschach test. So, you know, listen and hear what they might have to say about that. It's I think, a good advice. Okay, 7. Take back patriotic symbols. Search for common ground using the symbols of patriotism, the flag, the Constitution, and love of country. You can say, I'm reaching out to you because I love you and I love America. And I think that is right on, too. I give points for that one. And that gets us to the next one I wanted to share. And this is from a video that was put out on Vox, V-O-X. And Vox is an interesting site. I've always thought it had a sort of a proto-integral sensibility. It definitely prides itself on going up against the sort of mono perspective of postmodernity. It's always trying to come up with a contrarian view, or often. I see that less now, but at any rate, this is a really interesting video. It's done by a young journalist of some renown in her, I think, late 20s, Liz Plank. And it's a series of videos called The Divided States of Women. And this is a segment, and I'm going to play all 3 minutes of it. Actually, 3 minutes of probably an 8 or 9 minute video, where she goes to a convention of young conservative women. Okay, and because she wants to do this thing that we all feel like we need to do, and that is reach out and find out and learn. So here we go. And I need to push this button.
Feminism has always meant the belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. We're used to seeing progressives proudly identify with the movement. But now feminism seems to be trending amongst a group of women who have not traditionally been associated with the movement, conservative women.
I do label myself a feminist, and I think of that in very broad terms.
I believe that a feminist is any woman who lives the life she chooses.
I would tell my 3 daughters, the job for first female president of the United States remains open, so go for it.
I mean, if women who traditionally didn't embrace feminism are suddenly owning it, what exactly do they think feminism is? I needed to find out, so I went to Dallas, Texas, to a young women's conservative conference organized by Turning Point USA. Did you guys all just meet right now?
Like a minute ago, yeah.
Are you BFFs?
Now we are.
Yeah. As I talked to these young conservative women, I realized that surprisingly many of them identified as feminists.
Ivanka identifies as a feminist. Do you identify as a feminist?
For sure. Absolutely.
Carly Fiorina has said, you know, feminism is what you choose to do with your life as a woman.
I actually am a conservative feminist.
I do consider myself a feminist.
This is my feminism. These are my feminists. This is my feminist movement.
I don't believe there's a glass ceiling.
I think that the wage gap is a myth.
There's nothing planned about Planned Parenthood. It really needs a new name. My frustration with abortion is that I think people are just using it as a form of birth control.
Modern feminism, I don't identify with as much. I mean, I attended the Women's March. I marched with a sign that says, "Guns save lives." And I mean, I was spit on and yelled at and screamed at. We're kind of not considered feminists just for being conservative.
I want to know that that movement is open to conservative women.
All this whole divisiveness that the media's created, if we were to just like sit down and just have a conversation.
Conservative women feel left out because of their political beliefs. But throughout history, many women have been left out just because of who they are. Even women who have had crucial roles in the history of the movement, have been excluded from the mainstream feminist recipe.
Welcome to Feminists in the Kitchen, voluntarily. Joining me today is celebrity guest Akilah Hughes.
Mass-produced mainstream feminism recipes always include your basic ingredients. The suffragette movement, Rosie the Riveter, Lena Dunham's liberal use of skorts. But even when discussing those parts of feminism, key ingredients are then pushed to the side and their roles marginalized, leading people to conclude that there are only a handful of things in feminism, but there is so much more, okay? Now watch what happens when you add a little Sojourner Truth to the mix. It's gonna give you that early abolitionist women's rights, universal suffrage base that all the other ingredients then build off of. Now you're gonna wanna sprinkle in some Marsha P. Johnson all over this thing. She's the African-American trans woman who reportedly threw the first brick at the Stonewall riots. She's essential to the recipe, and yet somehow people are still pretending you can make feminism without her. Can you imagine leaving all this good shit out?
That's crazy. When my mom used to make feminism when I was a kid, my favorite part was Sylvia Rivera, who founded STAR, a group dedicated to helping homeless young drag queens and trans women of color. Why would anyone leave that out?
Because of systemic racism, homophobia, and trans misogyny. So to bind this all together, in 1989, legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. You literally cannot make feminism without it.
I've had feminism without that, and it tasted like trash.
Trash! There's just so much in feminism. Luckily, we've got a feminism ready to enjoy.
This is the best feminism I've ever had.
I know, that's what I keep telling everyone.
Thanks for joining me, Akilah. And thanks for watching Feminists in the Kitchen, voluntarily.
Although feminism is being embraced by more people, it's important to make sure that it doesn't get devoid of its meaning and mission. Just like Audre Lorde once said, it is not our differences that divide us, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences.
All right. So that was interesting. So they go to the conservative conference. They talk to some conservative women who talk about guns save lives and glass ceiling is a myth and that abortion is problematic because people use it for birth control. And these are conservative positions. And then they go to a skit where they, I don't know if they're trying to metabolize what they just saw or have any relationship with it, but they point out that there has been a whole bunch of people who've been left out of feminism, but they're not the people on the right or the women on the right who you know, Carly Fiorina, there's a whole bunch of them who actually are feminists, who actually believe in the equality of women, and the ability of women to, as Carly Fiorina put it, choose whatever life you want to live. That's feminism. And, you know, it's hard to argue with that. But fair enough, what they're doing is they're adding the women on the left who have been left out. And they bring up three people, Sojourner Truth, Marsha P. Johnson, and Sylvia Rivera, two of which are trans women, one of which who was in Stonewall, the other which started a group dedicated for drag queens and trans women. And they add that. So that's, you know, broadening the field. And I think those people ought to be part of the cake, you know, baked into the cake too. But it's not responsive to what we had just seen and what was, you know, the theme of this video. And then they end with this thing again that is so misunderstood that she says, as more people embrace feminism, it's important that it doesn't get devoid of our meaning and mission. And then she quotes this quote, and this is the thing that sums it all up. It's not our differences that divide us, but the inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. But there was no celebration of the feminists who believe that guns save lives. So, and I'm not sure there can be. This is, you know, one of the sort of challenges that at some point I get kind of confused with it all too. And I think there's a stage where we're consciously incompetent. And, you know, previous to conscious incompetence is just unconscious incompetence. And that's bad, that's just ignorance. But now we're sort of, you know, these people, all of these that we just showed are people who really know that they are incompetent. in understanding their political opponents. And they're trying to work on that, but they just don't like them. And they don't like anything that they think. And so they're, struggling like a little baby trying to find his feet to sort of sort it all out. And I think it's just, if I'm all for it, this is right on schedule. This is green, realizing that it's time to move on, that there was too limited, there's an echo chamber, and it's a first stab at true integral multi-perspectivalism, what we're seeing here. But it's these are pretty, they're not that successful stab yet, but fair enough, we're moving forward. And then finally, I want to share a little bit from a column from David Brooks, and I think here David Brooks does hit the mark. And Brooks is interesting. A lot of people in the integral community pay attention to David Brooks. He's, of course, the op-ed columnist weekly for the New York Times, so he's sitting in a very highly influential position in the culture. And he often has sort of just short of integral views. It's sort of frustrating to read him sometimes. But here I think he actually hit the nail in the head. And this is a column that he wrote a couple days ago called How to Engage a Fanatic. And he starts out by talking about, he had just done some travels. And he started out at a baseball game in Washington, where he sat behind a guy who spent 10 minutes haranguing him, his wife, and his son for something. And so there was a fanatic at the baseball park, probably his politics. He talked about going to Madrid, where this big conflict between the Spanish and the Catalans about independence for Barcelona and the Catalans. And then he talked about going to a campus in North Carolina where he sat in this really heartfelt discussion on whether and how to allow extremists to speak on campus. He talked about traveling to England and hearing a fight between the Brexit and the anti-Brexit people. And so here's what he writes about that. He first of all, he writes about, there's certainly an argument that at some point, racist views and so forth just have to not be tolerated. And that there's an argument for that, and that, civility is not a suicide pact, as he puts it. But then he says, on further reflection, and here's where I'll see if I could share the screen again. Oops, there we go. Is that up, Corey?
Yep, I can see it.
Cool. All right, so here's what he says. And I really love this. I think he's right on. He says, the only way to really confront fanaticism, this is after he sort of entertains that other perspective.
Oh, Jeff, I'm sorry. I think we're actually looking at your notes for the show right now.
Oh, okay.
Different tab,
so
maybe?
Let me stop that share and go back to, put this, screen share, and how about that?
Yep, I can see that. And just so everyone knows, this is what post-production is for.
Yes, exactly. But we're learning this. This is really going to be good to use stuff from the culture and to show it. And I'm really happy to be on our learning curve here, Corey. All right, so he writes, so finally, the only way to confront fanaticism is with love. Ask the fanatics genuine questions. Paraphrase what they say so they know they've been heard. Show some ultimate care for their destiny and soul, even if you detest the words that come out of their mouths. Hallelujah. And he says, you engage fanaticism with love first for your own sake. If you succumb to the natural temptation to greet this anger with your own anger, you'll just spend your days consumed by bitterness and revenge. You'll be a worse person in all ways. And I think we can see that in a lot of our friends and sometimes in ourselves with this Trump era, that it has what he just said, consumed by bitterness and revenge. And so I think calling that out is good. If, on the other hand, you fight your natural fight instinct, your natural tendency to use the rhetoric of silencing, and instead regard this person as one who is, in his twisted way, bringing you gifts, then you'll defeat a dark passion and replace it with a better passion. You'll teach the world something about you by the way you listen. You may even learn something, and I love this next part. A person doesn't have to be right to teach you some of the ways that you are wrong. So I love that. And then he talks about second, you greet a fanatic with compassionate listening as a way to offer an unearned gift. I love that. An unearned gift to the fanatic himself. This is not about being fair, you know. These days, most fanatics, he writes, are not Nietzschean supermen. They are lonely and sad. Their fanaticism emerging from wounded pride, a feeling of not being seen. If you make these people feel heard, maybe in some small way, you will address the emotional bile that is at the root of their political posture. And I think that's right on. I think that those of us in the, you know, modern and postmodern world thought that we could just move forward without, you know, bringing the traditionalists into the party. And they do feel left out. And if you look at the culture, not just the politics, but culture, they are pretty much left out. So, you know, at least pop mass culture. And then finally, he writes, it's best to greet fanaticism with love for the sake of the country. We all swim in a common pool. You can shut bigots and haters out of your dining room or your fantasy football league. But when it comes to national political life, there's nowhere else to go. We have to deal with each other. Civility, Stephen L. Carter writes, is the sum of the many sacrifices we are called to make for the sake of living together. And I love that. I'll read that again. Civility is the sum of the many sacrifices we are called to make for the sake of living together. And then he goes on, he says, you don't have to like someone to love him. All you have to do is to imitate Martin Luther King, who thrust his love into his enemies' hearts in a way that was aggressive, remorseless, and destabilizing. And I'll read that again. Imitate Martin Luther King, who thrust his love into his enemies' hearts in a way that was aggressive, remorseless, and destabilizing. And it's so true. I mean, you know, Martin Luther King has this sort of iconic status in our culture for a reason. And if you haven't read his writing, I mean, his speaking is amazing, and that's sort of in the sort of water. But his writing is exactly this. And it's just, I mean, talk about love as, you know, a destabilizing force. Try Letter from a Birmingham Jail. All right, see you. Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot. I see there's a podcast called Conversations with People Who Hate Me that is getting a lot of attention. And, you know, this is a guy who's trying the same thing. I maybe I'll take a listen and play some from that. But it's good to see the culture trying to do this. And I think, you know, some of the examples we used is trying in sort of a ham-handed way, but, you know, I'm all for it. Thanks, folks. So, Corey, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great, man. That was inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, such an, you know, clearly building bridges at this sort of juncture in the era that we're in is vitally important, because we are absolutely in the process of tearing each other apart. And it's interesting what happens, you know, when a society like ours, that is as strong as ours, that's as wealthy as ours, it's as powerful as ours, what happens when we don't have a clear enemy outside of our own borders? I mean, you know, this is a lesson that ancient Rome learned a long time ago.
Yeah, we were well organized around fighting the Nazis, the communists.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
The enemy was clear, and it was over there.
That's right. Not this nebulous ISIS thing that's more of an ideology than, you know, even having Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein. I mean, these were boogeymen. And those boogeymen, I mean, you know, it's, again, we're all just a bunch of primates. And those boogeymen do have the power of, when you have someone that you can so clearly other, that's way over there, there's a lot more room for us on this side.
Right.
So
instead of that, we developed, you know, in the 60s, although there was some impulses earlier than the 60s, the postmodernity came online.
That's right.
All of a sudden, you know, there's a new worldview that never existed on the planet in all of history.
Yep.
And so the people who, again, for some reason, God set it up.
Yep.
So these stages of development hate each other.
That's right.
And so all of a sudden there's this new enemy, this new culture that comes online. And for early modernists and traditionalists, it was easy to slide right in.
Yeah.
That's the new enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and if I could, I wanted to take a couple of minutes because so much of what you were talking about resonates with this sort of little side project that little side practice, I guess, that I've been working on, which is sort of integral tips for good interpersonal hygiene. So how to have a conversation with anyone, really, whether they're, you know, ideologically, you know, diametrically opposed from you or not. And it's based on, you know, I've been a bit of a broken record lately, talking about sort of the three principles or the three heuristics of integral thinking, which is non-exclusion, which is the idea that everyone is right. Enfoldment, which is the idea that, well, some are more right than others. And enactment, which means if you want to know this, do that. And, you know, this has been, I think, really close to my own heart because, you know, it's one thing to learn something like the integral model, right? Learn about quadrants, levels, lines, states, types, all that stuff. And then, you know, slowly learning how to use them. And for some people who are just sort of coming into this, that can be a little bit, you know, even clunky or sort of paint by numbers or something like that. And I just find myself more interested in, you know, in addition to the integral model itself, I'm really interested in the type of thinking that produces things like the integral model in the first place. And that's what these three heuristics are. So I've been, you know, spending the last few months really sort of trying to deeply feel into that. And, you know, and I've had a couple sort of little micro practices emerge. So I just wanted to take a minute and kind of share some of those, if that's okay.
Sure, you bet.
So non-exclusion, again, is the idea that everyone is right. And, you know, as such, it's always a really, really good idea and a good practice to try to begin your responses with an agreement, especially when you disagree, right? Build that bridge right away. Try to find that one little piece in the other perspective that you can anchor, right? That you can build the rest of your sort of interaction around. So good questions to ask yourself and maybe questions to ask the other person. Where do we agree? How do we agree? How can I include your argument even if it seems to run against my own? Are we speaking across each other? Are we both referencing data from different dimensions of reality or different data sources that's creating this sense of a contradiction? But there actually isn't a contradiction because we're literally talking right past each other. So our data is not really making a connection. Am I arguing in good faith? Am I checking my own presumptions and biases that I'm walking into this conversation with? Are you doing the same for me? Am I just using this conversation as an opportunity to evangelize my own view? Or am I actually trying to establish a genuine connection with you? And then as we were talking about the other day, it's always critical to try to, you know, identify the deeper values that someone is expressing from, but negate the view. So that's a way to cut through that sort of homophobia, because no, you know, liberalism does not need to tolerate intolerance. However, if you don't dig deeper, if you don't scratch beneath that itch of intolerance and sort of, you know, get into that juice that's really animating those defensive, reactive sort of positions to begin with, then you're not going to make any progress. And we're just going to continue to separate from each other. So the second piece is unfoldment, the idea that some are more right than others. And this is by far the most challenging aspect of this, right? So you've got your view that's based on your data and, more importantly, your enactment of that data. And then I've got my view that's based on my own enactment of my own set of data. How do we fold these two sort of, perceptions of reality together? So, disagreement is not only inevitable, it's invigorating. And the reason for that is, our differences are something to be celebrated. We grow in the gaps between us. So you should always advocate your view and your perspective and your insight, but also be receptive. Listen to my views, my perspectives, and my insights. Try to either identify a higher agreement that you're both working towards, or a more fundamental agreement that you're, again, basing this conversation, this entire argument on. See if there's a way that we can actually learn from each other and work through our disagreements while maintaining sort of that mutual respect. Always dialogue in good faith. And good questions to ask here is, where do we disagree? How does your perspective fit or fold or mesh into my perspective? And how does mine fit into yours?
I think that's actually a good point. And I'm not sure that I hit it before, but yeah, actually really making clear where the disagreement is. That's progress, because it brings clarity. And instead of having a pseudo agreement or a let's just be nice agreement. Now, for some people, a pseudo agreement is what you want. I mean, you want to be friendly with your in-laws and that sort of thing. But if you're really in a good faith argument, with another person, clarifying those fine points of disagreement is quite liberating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And just simply displaying that level of curiosity, right? I mean, I think that's sort of the key. Like, as you mentioned, no one is going to pass up a chance to talk about themselves or to more fully reveal themselves.
Transmute criticism to curiosity.
Absolutely.
And you got 90% of the ball game.
That's right. That's right. So another question to ask, what are the means by which we can identify the partiality of each other's perspectives while, again, still being respectful, still being productive, and being completely non-hostile? And that's why these conversations are always so much easier to have in person than they are on the internet, where, you get just so many layers of anonymity and so many layers of just inaccountability. You don't have to be accountable for what you say. Whereas, if you say something rude when you're sitting in front of someone, you see, their expression change and you feel bad. It's, there's space for empathy, and all of these, if we actually genuinely want to unfold with each other, it has to be based on that mutual exchange of empathy, or else, again, you're just barking at each other or just sort of bloviating and gesticulating in each other's general direction. And then the final piece is enactment. If you want to know this, do that. And it's always critical to remember, when we're trying to unfold with each other, it's one thing if both people are coming from the same data set, right? So if, like, I read this New York Times article and you read this New York Times article and we're both interpreting it slightly different ways, that's one kind of conversation, as opposed to you're reading Washington Post and New York Times, I'm reading Breitbart and 4chan. We're enacting radically different data sets, even if we're coming from the same cosmic address. And that's going to make the world look drastically different to us, right? So with enactment, you always have to remember that people are enacting data in different ways from different cosmic addresses. And you should always remember that, throughout the conversation, we're engaged in a practice of skillful communication, even if both parties aren't aware of that. It's important that you always remember that this is a practice. This is a moment-to-moment opportunity to practice and to demonstrate genuine love, curiosity, compassion, acceptance.
Yes. I mean, how wonderful is it to actually take our relationship so seriously and to be so generous with the people we're in a relationship with that we consider it a practice.
Absolutely.
To actually continue to pour our attention into this person, to see them in this moment, not 10 seconds ago.
Yep.
To open our hearts, to feel them, to feel our bellies, and how we, the energy in our subtle bodies and how that's mixing.
That's right.
Wow. There's such a rich practice there.
It really is, Jeff. And it goes far beyond sort of that conversation you happen to be having, if you can actually build that bridge, you can actually establish that trust, you can establish that respect, then, 5 days from now, 3 weeks from now, as soon as new data sort of presents itself, you have a different filter. You have a different empathetic filter. Like, I actually find myself, I've had a lot of disagreements with a lot of really well, very thoughtful people who've got, a really great things to say that I just happen to completely disagree with. But when that respect exists between us and, something new sort of drops down the channel, I will actually find myself looking at that from their point of view weeks after we've had the engagement, right?
Totally.
So
because you've brought on a piece of the worldview that you didn't have before, and that's actually a permanent acquisition.
Exactly. Yeah.
To the degree that you actually got their point of view, you can contain that in your bigger space of awareness.
That's right.
And it's actually available to you.
Yep.
When nothing else will do, actually.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. So you should always use self-awareness and discernment to circumvent or de-escalate conflicts by keeping the discussion as evidence-based as possible, right? So don't leave the conversation just sort of in the realm of feelings. Try to bring real evidence, but most importantly, evidence that you can both agree on, right? You can actually, both parties can look at this evidence, say, yes, this is valid, even if we interpret that evidence, right?
Yeah.
And this can be really difficult with a certain type of Trump supporter for whom, there's a certain level of reasonable, rational conversation that just isn't going to, it's literally over their heads, right? And so you always have to be skillful enough to know who you're talking to and whether they're capable of embracing the same data that you're embracing.
But you could still listen to them.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's, the idea that we only deal with people who treat us fairly is crazy.
That's right.
I mean, is that how you deal with a child?
Right.
That's
And that's right. And you have to remember that for them, how they're enacting their emotions is their reality, and it's valid. There's
and if they're seen by you, there is a metabolization of love, just seeing and being seen itself.
That's right.
And if you can't be seen, then just see the other person.
Yep.
That's an act of love.
Yep. Beautifully said. And so just to finish this
more
thought,
love in universe.
A couple easy questions to ask yourself to help with this is, ask yourself, be reflective. Why do I see the world the way that I do? Why am I so assured of whatever, this perspective is that I'm advocating? What perspectival injunctions am I employing to disclose the data that I'm trying to communicate or the validity of my claim? In other words, have I actually taken a close look at this, or is this coming from my own sort of emotional response? How can I construct my argument in a way that actually discloses this data for you? It doesn't just bark it at you, but allows you to sort of step into the data, enact it in real time, enacting real meaning and mutual understanding for the both of us. How can I present my perspective in a way that you can actually see the world through my eyes? And this is where skill and empathy are just paramount, right? And also, am I simultaneously actively trying to see the world through your eyes? And, if we just all did a little bit better on that, just a little bit better in actually engaging each other and, most importantly, seeing the world through each other's eyes, how much of this would, just quickly go to the wayside? How much of this water would go under that bridge that we're building?
Yeah. Right on, man. Yeah. And just one final distinction is all of this doesn't mean that you don't fight them tooth and nail politically.
Exactly.
But you don't fight them with hate in your heart. And
Yep.
you're just a far better opponent at that point.
That's right.
And Martin Luther King is a great example.
Yep. And Jeff, we have one comment from Steve I just wanted to bring into the show. He says, I feel like listening is the better exercise. They don't feel heard or understood. We have to have compassion for their suffering, their struggle, and not condemn them for wanting a better life.
Right.
Then it makes them no different to us. They have the relative truth, and just trying to replace it with our relative truth without understanding where they're coming from is no help to deepen their insights. And his question is, how can we just get them all meditating? Because that'll fix everything.
Well, more and more people are meditating all the time. I mean, if you think of what's going on at every YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association, there's more meditation classes there are anything in Christianity. I mean, it's become the mindfulness, all of this stuff, it's entering the culture like crazy. It's an idea whose time has come. We can notice that that's happening. Yep. And of course we can promote it and do, and be, advocates for that. But yep. It's people are sucking it up because it's next.
Yep. And it works.
You don't have to be a Buddhist to do it. Yep. Yeah, totally. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody. And thank you, Corey. What fun, huh?
Yeah, that was great. Awesome. Yeah. It was a fun week. And just to let everyone know, tune in this Saturday. Ken Wilber is going to be doing a presentation at 1 p.m. Mountain Time on Saturday, which is the 28th. He's doing a sort of an extended preview of his keynote presentation for the What Now conference at the end of this year. And it's on, what are we calling it? Integral Tantra, Love, Sex, and Awakening, which is like 3 of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So that's this coming Saturday, 2 days from now.
Yep.
At what time?
It's going to be at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. If you can't make it right at 1 p.m., that's okay. It'll be replaying all day long. But yeah, and just so everyone knows, we have actually extended the early bird pricing for our What Now tickets. We were originally doing the first 150 tickets get $600 off, which is a crazy like 40% discount or something like that. And we're trying to keep those prices low. So we actually decided to extend that early bird promotion until November 1st.
Cool.
So until the evening of November 1st, you can get What Now tickets and save $600 doing so. After that, they're going to go up. I'm not sure how much.
Cool. And it's What Now is the conference here in Denver.
Yeah, it's in Greenfield, Colorado.
Yeah, I think that's December 29th through the January 1st.
You nailed it.
What Now, whatnow.com or something?
We'll include links on the page.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, thanks, Corey, and thanks, everybody. And let me also just remind you, if you're not a member of Integral Life, please check it out. And so we're done for this week, and we will see you next week on Monday for another week of Daily Evolver Dailies.
Beautiful.
Bye, folks.
Bye, Jeff.